Hello, KZFR. How you guys doing? It is a nice night out tonight, actually. Last time I was there, it was pouring down rain, so I showed up quite drenched. But this time, I am definitely not, so things are going good for me. All right, well, this is KZFR 90.1 Chico, listener-supported community radio for the Sacramento Valley, the foothills, and beyond. And my name is Kevin, and this is Writing on Air. I was here, about 2 weeks ago, and that was my first radio show. So for those of you who don't know what this is a show designed to give students around the world, anywhere really, a chance to air their music on radio, basically. So they can submit stories to me at write.onair@gmail.com. One more time, that's write.onair@gmail.com. There we go. I always forget it. I have so many things that I'm doing. Yeah, and so they can submit stories to me and basically just kind of get their works heard and get their works out there, get their creativity out in the community, because I think that's really, really necessary. We often overlook writers and stuff like that, but I think they're really a lot of the glue that holds a lot of our society together, or at least allows people to critique things and talk about things that normally aren't talked about in conversation. So I get a lot of really cool works from people, and tonight will be no exception to that. It's going to be amazing, in my opinion, and hopefully everyone else's too. So KZFR, Writing on Air, is made possible by the generous contributions of KZFR supporters and by the Pita Pit, locally owned and operated in downtown Chico at 240 Broadway since 2004. The Pita Pit features a variety of fresh Mediterranean, Greek, and American foods, including pita wraps, falafels, gyros, and deli favorites, all made to order. Pita Pit is open 7 days a week with catering and delivery available by calling 899-2847. So, this first story I'll be playing tonight is by Sierra Stonebreaker. She is from University of California, Riverside, UCR, down in SoCal, my hometown, or at least close to it at least. And it is called Signs of Cowardice. When the doctor left the room, neither Aaron nor Mickey could speak. They let the space between them fill up with beeps from the heart monitor and their processed breathing. Aaron was watching the door, waiting for the doctor to rush back in and announce that it was a mistake, that he picked up someone else's chart, or her test results had been wrong somehow. But the door remained closed and everything remained broken. Aaron could not see her looking at him. She was looking through the window at the birds sitting in the tree outside. He wanted to leave. Mickey wasn't crying, wasn't talking, wasn't doing anything but watching the window. This disturbed him. Not that it was surprising. Aaron always had a lot to do, had a lot of work. Aaron always had to do a lot of work to get Mickey to admit when something upset her. But he thought that officially dying was something that would allow her to let her pride go. He needed to leave. Either leave or say something. Break the ear-splitting silence. Mouse? He said, using his nickname for her. His voice seemed to startle her. She turned to him like she didn't know he was sitting there, next to her in the hospital bed. Yeah? She said, her expression questioning, like it was weird that he said her nickname like that. And her face was pale and gaunt, reminding him of all the medals she missed. All the meals she missed in the mornings. She didn't feel like getting out of bed. It proved for him that this was real. The doctor hadn't made a mistake and wouldn't be coming back. Mickey had leukemia. The hospital was treating her, but nothing they were doing was working. The doctor had finally said that she was going to die. Mickey was dying. He couldn't help it. He was going to cry. He was going to cry, and she would have to console him like she always did, even though he knew it should be the other way around this time. God, he was pathetic. Aaron rubbed his eyes, hoping to rub away the feeling of breaking down. It didn't work. Tears were sneaking out of the cracks between his fingers while he tried to shield his eyes from her gaze. He snaked in a breath through his teeth and tried to speak. His voice was rough. "What are we going to do, Mouse?" he said. She shrugged. Aaron saw through his fingers. It was like he asked her what she wanted for lunch, looking back toward the window. She said, "Should we even bother getting married?" Her tone was resigned. Hearing her voice so undisturbed, so accepting, stabbed Aaron. He removed his hands from his eyes. They were wet. He wiped them on his jeans and rubbed his eyes again, drying them. "You don't want to get married?" "Well," she started, then took a long inhale. Whatever she'd been trying to hold back seemed to break loose. "I just don't see the point." Tears were rolling over her cheeks and sneaking into her mouth. "It's not like I can plan a wedding or anything," she said with wet lips. Even while crying, she remained composed. They were just tears. No sniveling, no sobbing. The only other time she had cried in front of Aaron was when his father died. It seemed like through the whole thing she was the one who kept his head from falling under. She was the one who had to talk him through his fears of her health, rub his back at the end of the night, tell him everything was going to be okay, and that she would live and he wouldn't be alone. But this afternoon, she was splitting open, revealing the last desperate side of her that was too exhausted to do anything but cry. This was his chance then, wasn't it? To be the strong one. To be there for her like she was when his dad died 2 years ago. To move to her side, wrap her in her arms, and tell her that they could still get married. To dry her face with his sleeve and console her with an embarrassing story of when he was a kid. But he wasn't doing that. Aaron was still in the chair by her hospital bed, watching tears spill down her cheeks while she cried silently. No, I guess you can't," he said, feeling cold and heavy and small. So small. This seemed to sober her, and she wiped her face. "Okay," she whispered, and turned over in bed, showing him her back. The room was silent again until it filled with the faint sound of Mickey's deep snores. Aaron had seen her before. It felt like the exact same spot. It wasn't. His dad died in a different room a few floors above them, but he was definitely feeling deja vu. One long, horrible deja vu. She was asleep, he was awake, and he didn't know what to do. He could leave, go to the cafeteria and buy a tea, and maybe it would help him clear his head. But he felt rooted to his seat, forced to watch her back sink and fill with the rhythm of her snoring, and to trace with his eyes the protruding ridges of her spine. She looked so frail. How come he hadn't seen it before? He really didn't want to be there. Every minute he spent watching her, he was really watching her die. She was dying in front of him, and Aaron hated this. He didn't want to go through it again. He didn't want to see someone die, but he felt trapped. Even a little blindsided, like he did when he was in that hospital room a few floors above them, when the beeping turned into one running, high-pitched tone, and the expression on his old man's face flattened, and somehow he was gone. His dad was there, but gone. And soon Mickey would be gone. And Aaron would be there, alone, to witness it happen. He didn't want to be there. They were only 25, and Aaron hadn't been with anyone else. They met their freshman year of college. She beat him in a drinking game at a party, but she felt bad and brought him a beer afterward to where he sat outside, alone. Later she teased him about it, wounded his pride. even though he had told her he hadn't cared that he lost to a girl. And he really didn't, because his mom used to beat him at blackjack all the time. But sometimes he would admit it, that it did sting a little bit, that a girl beat him in a chugging contest, and she would smile and say, "I knew it, you liar," and kiss him on the cheek. Aaron loved Mickey. He really did. But he didn't want to stay. No, he couldn't stay. He couldn't do it again. He couldn't watch another person, someone he loved, die in front of him. Even if she lived for another year, he couldn't watch her wilt and wilt, month by month, until she was nothing. He just couldn't. Aaron knew it would destroy him if he was there when she died, and he was forced to do nothing but let it happen. He felt so helpless before. He didn't believe he could do it again. When the thought actually formed in his mind, it felt like he was dreaming. It was similar to the feeling of déjà vu, but things had become more ethereal. The walls around him suddenly felt fuzzy, the sounds of Mickey's heart monitor like waves crashing in his ears. The feeling lasted only a few seconds, but he came out of it knowing exactly what it was. Aaron was going to leave Mickey. His heart was breaking, but this was something he could do. Aaron moved around the bed and held her hands. There was something new in the way he did this. Somehow he felt stronger, as if he held more agency in his actions. It wasn't like anything he'd experienced before. He wondered if this is what it felt like to put down a sick animal. Except he felt like both the vet and the syringe, and the vet with the syringe and the sick animal. But it was kind of a relief to take control of something like this, even if it was his own heart. Aaron nudged her bony shoulder, and her eyelids flickered open. Mickey groaned. "What?" she said, and pulled her hand out of his grasp so she could rub her eyes. He thought at first that he might cry, but no, he wasn't going to. That would come later on the drive home, but for now he had to keep his resolve. But then he didn't know what to say. The words weren't forming. Mickey looked at him, concerned. Concern creased around what was left of her eyebrows. "What?" she said with a degree of alarm. Mickey, he cupped her face, held her jaw in his hand. Her skin was cold. "Mouse, I'm leaving," he said. The alarm in her expression faded. "Oh, okay. Where are you going?" He didn't have to do this. This was his last chance to back out and pretend like normal. He could say he was just going home, that he forgot his toothbrush, something like that. No, he couldn't. He had to continue. It hurt, though. "No, Mickey, I'm leaving." Aaron couldn't say that last word. "You. I'm leaving you." He hoped his face betrayed him, showed every inch of pain he was feeling because he couldn't say the last word. But she was going to make him. "What are you talking about?" she said. And she was glaring at him. She knew what he meant, but she was stronger than him, even while sick, and wasn't going to let him get away with a clean break. "I'm sorry," he said, and pulled away slightly, his nose dripping. Then she slapped him. Her hit wasn't hard, even though he knew she put everything she had into it. "You coward," she said. I know," he said, and touched his cheek. Not because it hurt, but because he felt like it should. Mickey wasn't going to cry this time. She wouldn't do that. Aaron rubbed his eyes, rubbed his cheek, rubbed the 2-day-old stubble on his chin. He turned away from her. "I know." Whew, when I was pre-reading that one got me. It's a pretty intense story. And again, that is by Sierra Stonebreaker, Signs of Cowardice. I believe this is a piece of a bigger story she's writing, so hopefully we'll get some more from her at some point, because that was very good. So thank you, Sierra, for either tuning in and submitting, because that was fantastic. And I love getting pieces like that, because anything that can move a person, I think, has some real value. And if not either, it's entertaining. So both ways, it's very fun. This next one is by Brandon Melrose. He goes down to SoCal, where I used to live as well. And this one does not have a title yet. I believe it's a piece that he's working on, is what I was told. Yes, that's what I believe. So this is also another large piece that will hopefully have more appearances on this show. I think maybe the next one I'll get a couple from him too. We shall see. So this is Brandon Melrose one last time. Black, acrid smoke fills the air with the smell of rotting burnt flesh. The ground around me is misshapen and stained. This field will never again be the same. Plants will never grow here. Animals will not approach, and humanity will only speak of it, and few will be willing to approach. The corpses on the ground are all marked by their apparent faith in one way or another. Some still holding the symbol of their gods, others with their marks sewn and now torn surcoats. But where are their deities now? There were no gods. These men died for the belief that some deity that has not come to collect their soul, who has not, and did not protect them. 200 men lie dead here, and now the crows peck at their corpses, all because some deity told them to. I wish that I still held their beliefs dearly in my heart. I wish I was ignorant and blind, but the voices won't let me be, and smell tells me more than enough to know what happened here. Are you just going to stand here and admire the view, or are you going to get on with why you came here in the first place? A voice whispered in my ear. The voice was quiet, hard, and metallic. Do you really have any right to lecture me, you hunk of metal? I said, glancing only slightly at my right hand, which held my weapon, a long metal staff, while large curving blades at either end, colored silver and twisted with black. Would you care to try and fight without my help? Whispered the voice again in my head. To this I only scowled slightly. Fighting a wraith barehanded was more trouble than it was worth, and not something that I would particularly like to attempt today. If I were 10 years younger, I probably would have been foolish enough to try, but not today. And certainly not after what this one had done. Why did it have to be a wraith? Tall, thin, almost human-looking things with ashen gray skin standing over 6 feet tall. Their faces shift and flicker to become the person you love most. It means they tend to live a while because most people can't bring themselves to decapitate them. Unfortunately, you have to. The body means almost nothing. A bit of skin here, some bone there, all taken by a spirit from the tower. They eat flesh and feast on hatred. It makes them stronger, and oftentimes bigger. Like a massacre. After a massacre like this, I have one heck of a day ahead of me. It's over the ridge, and it seems to be having quite the feast, said that metallic voice in my head. Amanon, do you have anything more useful to tell me? Maybe something a little happier, I said in response. It's only been out 5 days, Amanon replied somehow, with a smirk ringing in his metallic voice. Great, I get a fresh one today. I quickly muttered a few things under my breath. A thin web of magic weaved its way around me, a spell to keep the fire at bay, one to strengthen my hide armor, and one finally to stave off the smell. I then began to climb the ridge, trying to disturb the corpses as little as possible. I spotted it just as I topped the ridge. It was tall, taller than most. Even with a feast this big, after only 5 days, it shouldn't be like that. It was hunched over a pile of bodies, picking off pieces and passed them by his face. It didn't take long for it to finish an arm. There was no visible mouth, but the flesh was going somewhere, and the bones were pearl when it finished. I crept down towards it, carefully and slowly approaching from the back, hoping to get lucky. But I've never been a very lucky man. I accidentally stepped on a chain coat, and the wraith turned to see what had made the noise. The cloudy, indeterminate face it wore began to spin and shift. It would never settle on anything. Amanon did more than talk, after all. The beast charged towards me with outstretched arms, with almost hook-like fingers. Wraiths tear you apart. It's a fun way to spend the last fleeting moments of your life. I stepped quickly to the side, sweeping one of Amanon's blades up through its left arm. It dropped, smoking to the ground. It gave no cry and showed no sign of pain. It looked at the stump where its arm had been with what I could only take as mild curiosity. It is rather hard to tell what something is thinking when it bears no countenance. Its other hand started to glow with a grayish-green light. Denizens of the tower pervert everything. The fire growing in its palm was not warm or even hot, but it would burn me all the same if it touched me. Worse, there is no way to put it out once it catches. It dies with its master. Thankfully, that is one thing I came here to do. It threw the green flame towards me and I swept it aside. Dashing forward, I hooked one of the silver-black curving blades on the back of the wraith's neck and pulled it cleanly through. The wound smoked and sizzled as the head dropped to the ground. Something like a dark gray fog grew around the head and slowly faded into nothing. "Well, that wasn't too bad," I said aloud. "And yet, I can't tell if you aren't very happy," my steely companion replied. "You said it was only 5 days free. It's as big as it would have been if it had been out there for 3 weeks or longer. It was unsure of itself and not very used to the body." "It had quite the feast," came the reply. "You know better than that. I don't like the thought of people raising wraiths, Ammonon. I especially don't like them enhancing newborns," I replied with a grimace. "Neither do I." The voice came solid, flat, and dark. The sun was setting when the village came into view. A small clutter of low wooden buildings save one. The sole stone building in the town sat just barely higher than the others, but just barely. A church was a good sign. Only 2 days' walk away from the battlefield, the father or the priest would be more than willing to help. Not that he would have had much choice, but the less strain I put on these people, the better. "Ammonon, sword, please," I said quietly. It had been a long 2 days. "Do I really have to?" he replied. "I scare the villagers enough as it is, so please, if you wouldn't mind," I replied sullenly. If Ammonon could sigh, he did, and morphed slowly into a hand and a half sword, with the same black and silvery metal and a leather-bound hilt. I slid him carefully into an empty scabbard I kept at my hip, and proceeded into the village. The church wasn't too hard to find, and I passed no one on my way to its doors, though with the time of the day I wasn't surprised. I looked towards the altar and was relieved to find that it wasn't one of the ones I'd seen on the field. To be honest, I doubt I could have told you which deity these or any man worshipped based off their crest, and it didn't really matter. There were a small number of simple pews with 3 parishioners scattered between them. I saw the father, clad all in black, look towards me, and his eyes noticeably widened. This wasn't unusual. While my height and build weren't that unremarkable, my bleached white skin was one mark against me. The other would be my eyes, the whites of which were now jet black aside from my pale green irises from my time spent with death. The father was a smaller man with a thin build and rough brown hair. He approached me somewhat quickly, but with obvious intent. "May I help you, my son?" he said, with some caution in his voice. I expected as much. I was a strange man in the country who was visibly armed. "I believe you can, father. I am Derwin, and I have come here seeking aid of the church," I said somewhat formally. "And where is your badge of office?" he replied suspiciously. "I can show you here if you wish, but I would prefer to do somewhere more private so as not to scare your loyal following." The father agreed and said, "I can show you here if you wish," I said, motion to the pews. The priest looked over at a few people in the pews and nodded in agreement, leading me back to where we entered a fairly small and barren study that served as the father's office. Once the door was shut, I slowly drew Ammonon from his sheath, careful that the motion didn't scare the father. Ammonon twisted and shaped itself in my hand without asking it into its original shape. We had gone through this ritual too many times for him needing to be asked. The father's eyes finally relaxed at the sight of Ammonon, and he seated himself behind his fairly Spartan desk. "How may I be of service, Derwin?" he said with some respect in his tone. "You may call me Tariq, father. I don't need much formality. As for what I need, all I require is your help and hopefully the help of a few of your followers in giving some men their final rites. There was a large battle 2 days' walk from here, and I need to send them off before it becomes a problem," I said casually. "I believe you can manage that rather easily. But why do you require our help? Is it not something that you can accomplish on your own?" He replied quizzically. "Even I can't perform over 500 rites within a reasonable amount of time," I replied. His eyes stiffened a bit as he realized just what I was asking for. "I see. I will put a call out to the townsfolk. I doubt that we should have much trouble gathering the necessary people," he said. I left after asking about lodgings in the village. Predictably, I found this place had no inn, so I went out of town and set a small camp by the road against the father's offers to allow me to use the church. I didn't trust the father. Looking into his eyes, I saw the door held ajar there. The man was on the brink of death, and I knew he was aware. There too many times had people confronted me as I was some dark god that had come from people's souls. Their fear and their faith twist their thoughts. I knock at death's door and walk its halls, but I don't collect its debts, only collecting those desperate souls that escape. I placed my head on my bedroll and waited for morning to come. Well, that was Brandon Melrose's story, currently untitled, I believe, and another dark one. That's pretty good. I believe, again, this is part of a larger piece, and this is just a snippet of it, so we might get more to come down the pipeline, so we shall see. Thank you again, Brandon, and if you're tuning in, I appreciate you helping me out here. This is really really fun to do for me, and it's always cool getting stuff from friends and whatnot. The next one is by Stephen Newell from CSU Chico, and this one's going to be called The Bus Stop. I didn't get much more info from this one. They just kind of submitted it and went on their way, so I'm assuming they're tuning in now, and if they are, thank you for submitting, because I really, really appreciate it. So this one is called The Bus Stop. The bus stop was far from town, nestled on a back road that often seemed cold and damp at any time of the year. It was hard to see from the road, mainly because it was surrounded by overgrown shrubs and a few large old oak trees. As far as could be seen in any direction, there were rows and rows of cornfields. This bus stop was the tallest thing around for miles. Today, like every day, there sat a man advanced in years. He wore a stiff gray overcoat and a matching gray bowler hat. He was clean-shaven, but often missed patches, leaving some of the white hairs and odd parts on his face. He was quite tall at 6'2", if anything. He could be said to have been the model for the neighborhood watch signs and that depict a shady character looking at some of his children. He sat there at 5:50 in the morning, waiting for the 6 o'clock bus to take him to his work at the grocery store. As usual, the bus pulled up at 5:55, and the man slowly got up and walked towards the door. "Morning, George," the bus driver said. The man known as George didn't smile, only slightly nodded his head as he labored against the stairs. This morning there was a young woman around her mid-20s sitting near one of the safety exits in the middle of the bus. She had black hair, light brown eyes, and she was wearing a professional blue suit coat with matching black pants. As soon as George entered the bus, she sat up straight and looked directly at him. "Excuse me, sir, but are you George Ducatel?" George paused in the aisles for less than a moment, then breathed deeply and sat down on the opposite side of the bus, a few seats away from the woman. "Yes, I am. I suppose you're another reporter." It's more of an observation than a question. "No, sir, I'm not. My name is Lauren Penton, with Penton Associates. We're a law firm based out of California. We specialize in older cases that were never fully resolved. Not quite cold cases, but you know the like." "You don't know anything about me. I didn't do anything wrong.